Society is doing an oral history project of World War II veterans and others who are part of other services such as Red Cross. Your interview will be filed in Atlanta in the Library of Congress. Start with your name, address, age, and birth date, what service you were in, why you joined that service, experiences you had, and how the war changed your life. You have an hour to speak. If I have a question, I'll wave my hand. I'll begin their interview with a short introduction. Today is Sunday, November 2nd, 2003. My name is Alex Glustrom. This is an interview with Harold Yudelson at his home at... Mr. Yudelson is a close friend of my grandparents. Mr. Yudelson, you can start now.
First, I'd like to say I have trouble separating the significant from the trivial, and also I hope from the fantasy and the real, because it's been a long time. So I'll try and stick to facts, but I may tell you more than I know sometimes. My first experience with the war, I guess, was Pearl Harbor Day. When the Jap bombed Pearl Harbor, I was on the way to a fraternity smoker, and somebody hollered, "We're at war," and I didn't believe them, and I went there and I found we really were at war. A friend of mine had a car. I was in Philadelphia, University of Pennsylvania. A friend of mine had a car, so we decided late in the evening, early in the evening, to drive to Washington and see what we could see. We got there about midnight and tried to get a hotel room. There were none available. We parked the car in front of the Capitol and went to sleep in the car. Nobody bothered us. Nobody said hello to us. We got up the next morning, the next morning when the sun came up, we could see the military had some machine guns on top of the Capitol, and but nobody bothered us at all. There was no security so far as we could see. We went to the various offices of the Senates and the Congressmen to try and get a pass to get in here, Roosevelt, and we could not. So we sat outside during all this and watched Roosevelt drive by in entourage about 200 feet away from us. Still nobody bothered us. And we sat there and listened on the radio to his speech. This is the day that will live in infamy. And we listened to Congress declare war. And then they had the roll call vote, rather. And we saw people leaving, so we managed to get in just as this lady, who was, I think, from Montana, cast the only no vote. So we heard them declare war, and we went home. And for the next year, virtually, the war didn't affect me any more than any other civilian. I stayed at school. I was 17, and they weren't drafting until I was 18 then. They weren't drafted until we were 19. Well, the military came to us and said if we, and I think it was November of '42, if we would enlist so they could get their hands on us without any hassle, they'd let us finish the term, which was February. So I would have been drafted in December. In February, I was reported for military duty. They took out virtually the entire sophomore class at the University of Pennsylvania.
Were you worried about getting drafted before you got drafted?
Well, I would have been drafted. Everybody was going to be drafted.
You just knew.
My birthday was December the 2nd, and I was supposed to report to Fort McPherson on December the 9th. That's my 19th birthday. But because I'd already enlisted, I didn't have to report. I reported for duty with the Army's orders February 22nd, I think. The term was over about the February the 20th, and the 21st, 22nd, 23rd, virtually the entire sophomore class, University of Pennsylvania, went into service. We were all 19 years old, and the Army had made us that deal. So we went down to Fort Meade, got there late at night, woke us up the next morning, issued us equipment, woke us up the next morning before daylight. I had no idea what time it was, but I remember I couldn't find my socks, so I put on my boots and my overcoat, and I'm standing out there in the snow, and the sergeant's got a flashlight calling the roll, and I was watching the moon through the pine trees, and I knew then I wasn't going to like the Army. They get up too early. So I went through, I was assigned to infantry basic training. They just dealt you out, and that's not what they recommended, but that's why they assigned me, because that's where they needed us. I took my basic training at Wheeler. That, I think, was 13 weeks. But during that time, the Army had set up an Army Special Training Program, ASTP, because they thought the war might last forever, and they better get some people back in college. So we took special tests, and they sent a bunch of us. I think the overall program was about 300,000 people, and they sent me to Washington University in Washington, Pennsylvania. I stayed there for 9 months and took regular college courses. Of course, we only had 80 scheduled hours a week, so it was like being in basic training, except it was scholastic instead of military training. There were rumors that they might keep some of us, so I got all A's for the only time in my history. I got a certificate for scholastic excellence and was sent back to the infantry as a buck private, which I was all the time. And the funny part, went to the 84th Division down at Camp Claiborne, Louisiana, and it was in its final stages of training for combat. It takes 18 months to train a division. It takes about 10 or 12 weeks to train an infantry private in an infantry division. And a lot of the people that went back to that division, all college people, had no infantry training, and we were getting special training. And about the only people in the ranks, the privates in the ranks that were there, were illiterates. All the others had already been sent over as replacements for casualties. So they wanted us to bolster the general IQ of the division. But the funny part, these boys were from Arizona and New Mexico. They were Indians, American Indians and Native Americans. When they sent us college boys out on map reading problems and compass problems at night, they always sent some of these people out to bring us back, and we got lost. So anyway, I remember D-Day. I woke up in the morning and so I said, hey, the invasion started, and that didn't make us unhappy because we were all packed up and ready to go, and we thought we'd be part of it, so I'm glad they started without us. Anyhow, I got a break. I went to OCS in August, just before the unit went overseas. I got a picture of my platoon at that time, and everybody in it was a casualty, including me later on. They were in the Battle of the Bulge. I missed it. I finished OCS about the week before the Battle of the Bulge started in December of 44, I guess it was. Yeah. And I was supposed, usually you got 3 months of troop duty to teach you how to be a lieutenant. I got about 3 weeks, and I went over as a replacement. Interesting incident before I went over, at Fort Meade, Baltimore, we were being oriented by, I guess he was an old leftover captain from World War I, gray-haired fella. And he says, gentlemen, you cannot take any whiskey on the boat, but the best place to carry it is in your outpack. So we all went and bought all the whiskey we could carry and put that. There was another incident I thought interesting. We were all assigned units, temporary units, to take charge of on the boat. And one of the boys in this unit had a German Shepherd dog he'd picked up in Alaska. And he was getting ready to go overseas, and he'd kept that dog with him all through his military career. And I asked his captain, I said, what are we going to do about the dog? He says, don't tell me about it. I don't know about it. Nothing. So we all ignored the dog. The dog was carrying this guy's pack, his, what do they call it, the big, the big canvas bag that they carried. The other people carried his equipment, and he took that dog all the way across the ocean. We got to Greenock, Scotland, and they threw the bag in the baggage compartment. The dog didn't move, as far as I know. We got to Liverpool. Got on a boat, we went across the channel, and there where am I? Liverpool. Well, we got to the port in France. They were throwing all these, Le Havre, they were throwing all these duffel bags, I'm trying to think of the name, duffel bags off this big dock onto these steel piers, and the sergeant knew they had one where the dog was. He was lowering it down the pulley along with the records, and this British major was standing there looking at him, and nobody ever said anything about the dog, and the last I know, the dog and the boy both went into combat. Anyway, so much for the trivia, but we went to a camp near Verviers, Belgium, which was close up to the front line to see the artillery off in the distance. And you weren't supposed to go into Verviers, but the sergeant took us in, and we took our whiskey and all got drunk. That was March the 1st or February the 28th, rather. And so the next day, I was assigned to the B Company, 2nd Battalion, 16th Infantry Regiment, the 1st Division, the Big Red One. There's been movies about that. Not because I was a good soldier, but because they just dealt us out like dealing cards, and that's where I happened to end up.
So how much training had you had?
What?
How much training?
Well, I'd had quite a bit of infantry training, both in basic training and then with the division for 6 months, the 84th Division, and then OCS was infantry training. So I had quite a bit of infantry training. enough, but quite a bit. Then
The Big Red One was a movie, wasn't it?
Yeah, they made a movie, The Big Red One. So we got, when we went up to this division, we went up this dirt road and the artillery was going over, I don't know coming or going, but anyway, I heard it. And they took us into this colonel's, he was in a big old chateau in this big old room, and he was a West Pointer. He says, "Gentlemen, this is a regular Army unit, and we expect yourself to conduct yourself like regular Army officers." That's it. That was our orientation from him. Then we went to battalion, and he took us in and showed us the maps and so forth of where we were and where the next guys were and what we expected to be and do for the next 2 days. And I went into my platoon, and the whole company was this old German factory with a tile floor. It's about midnight, more or less, and dark. And I introduced me to the sergeant, and I says, "It's your platoon. I can't do anything about not seeing anybody at night. Go to sleep. We all go to sleep. We don't expect to move." About 3 hours later, I remember taking my boots off and using them for a pillow. And about 3 hours later, they woke us up and says, "We got to go." Another unit was going into an attack, and we were to take their place on line. And so we moved out and took their place. And I remember marching the next day. It was the first day I saw a dead German, and then a burned up a tank that was exploding. And it finally dawns on you that you're actually in a war. You know, until then, it's unreal. It stayed unreal, but it became real at that point. Well, I remember we went through Aachen, Germany. I don't know, driving, I guess, moving someplace. There wasn't a roof left in the damn town and very few walls. It was totally destroyed. Then we attacked, we moved across the plains on the Rhine River. And our first attack, I really remember, was into Bonn, Germany. I remember crossing the railroad tracks into it and moving into it. And we were going down this street, the curve of this street, and a German machine gun opened up and missed me by about 6 inches. And we dived into a doorway and busted open the door and went into the house. And the guys behind me followed, and we went upstairs. And you could see the machine gun was sitting there. He didn't know where we were, I guess. So I asked who was the best shot. Some guy said he was, so he picked him off. And then they brought up a tank. Now they know where we are. So we went out the back of the house and retreated for a while. And it was getting dark, and I asked my position was in this town square, on the edge of this town square in Bonn, Germany, sort of a park. But there were about thousands, it seemed like thousands of Germans. They were retreating across the Rhine River. And so I asked the captain, I says, "Well, shall I attack?" He says, the town was so beat up that you couldn't tell the street from the middle of the block. The Jack force had bombed it so much along the river. And he says, "Well, you got a critical situation." He wouldn't commit me. So I said, "Well, give me a machine gun. I can't handle a whole platoon in this situation." So I sent a runner back, and they came up with a machine gun, and I had a sergeant who'd been there a long time. He says, "Lieutenant, we came into war by ourselves. They're going to be gone in the morning." So I sat down on a pile of bricks to think it over and fell asleep. So a few hours later, it was daylight. Some guy comes across that square that we didn't take and says, "We got a bridge." That was when they got that Remagen Bridge, which probably shortened the war, at least by weeks, if not by months. So, in this German tank that was burned up, the Germans, we got credit for destroying it, but we didn't do that. The Germans had blown it up because they couldn't take it across the river with them. Anyhow, we went down to the area of the Remagen Bridge, which is only about 20 miles away. We had transportation trucks, and there was an incident there where this captain, who'd been all through North Africa and everything, they ordered us to train the people in house-to-house fighting. I figured they all knew damn sight more than I did, so we were sitting around, and he came up and stood me at attention, and as we sit in the Army, he bored me. He raised hell with me for not training the people, so I learned a little bit in that anyhow. So we went to work. But anyway, a couple of days later, the Navy had brought up assault boats, and we crossed the Rhine. We did not cross under fire because the bridgehead at that point was probably a mile or two deep. But we spent the night in Remagen. There's a picture in National Geographic magazine of me and my platoon, me. I'm walking up the street in Remagen where we spent the night. I put the platoon in the basement and I went upstairs to see what was going on, what it looked like. And there was a beautiful feather bed, and I went to bed. And all night they shelled the damn town, and they kept hitting the roofs, and the shells with the tile roofs would slide down. I ought to be in the basement, but I didn't. I spent the night in that upstairs room. Anyway, the next day we moved out, and the problem, we had a bridgehead, and we didn't want, I say we, the top brass, I wasn't making strategy as a lieutenant, didn't want the Germans to be able to set up a defense line, so we were attacking 2 and 3 times a day to keep them from being able to dig in and set up a heavy defense line. But the problem was every time we attacked, somebody got hurt. So while the resistance was very light, parenthetically, Remagen was never a place where you would have crossed the Rhine River. There was no road net to speak of. It was very mountainous, and you couldn't really supply units very well. But when we got it, they did, and they used that bridge until it fell in. It had been damaged by artillery fire, and the reason it didn't go down when we got there is I heard some of the cables had been cut by artillery fire, and when it damaged the bridge, it didn't fall down, so we had it. And I've often wondered if I'd gotten there instead of that other lieutenant, if I had crossed that damn river, crossed that bridge with my platoon. But anyhow, they were concerned that the SS, the war was obviously going to end within a few weeks, more or less. And we were concerned that the SS or the Nazis might want to get down to the Bavarian Alps and set up a guerrilla warfare resistance forever. So we were trying to keep them from doing that and cutting them off. Well, we moved out very rapidly and then attacking every day. And then one day the tanks moved through. And I remember this General Murray Rose, if I remember correctly. He was the youngest division commander in the Army, a Jewish fella. Got killed in an ambush going down the road just ahead of us. But he was 9th Armored Division. He was always next door to us. And we attacked and then moved north toward the town of Paderborn. And we closed, the newspaper said, in the strategy, we closed the Ruhr pocket with 400,000 Germans in it. We had them surrounded. We had them surrounded, and our army was as deep as I am from front to back. And we were so damn tired by then. I was up on the hill one night and checking my platoon. Everybody was asleep. The Germans could have probably walked in and picked up our rifles if they wanted to, but they were probably more tired than we were. So anyhow, there were a couple of combat incidents that stand out. The whole thing is pretty much, the 6 weeks is somewhat of a blur, but there were a couple of them. One night we moved out and we knew we had 2 objectives. One was about close to a mile, and the second one was a forest across some open field, another half a mile or so. And my platoon being one of the newest, I was the newest officer still, and I was in reserve. The other platoons moved into this town and captured a few Germans. They woke them up, I guess. They didn't know we were there. And I had my platoon around this house, this large farmhouse, and we were supposed to bring up our tanks. We didn't bring them up at night. They were too vulnerable, so we sent a runner back, and some guy says to me, he says, "Lieutenant, there's some tanks coming, but I think they're German tanks." And I got in front of the house, and there were 2 German tanks in a half-track. You could recognize them silhouettes, you know. And they parked right in front of this house, and my platoon is all around the house. And this captain that I said had been there so long, he wanted me to continue the attack because the others were disorganized from searching the houses. And he starts hollering my name, Yudelson, which obviously means son of a Jew. And I told this guy to tell him I was busy, and I put a bazooka on each side of the house and told the first one, when you hear us shoot, you shoot. So when we fired, we hit the 2 tanks. We were only about 20 feet from them. You could spit on them almost. Well, we hit the 2 tanks, and some of the Germans jumped out and ran in the house, and we threw grenades in there, and they surrendered and came out and were dead. I never found out which. And then we reorganized and moved out and somebody told me that the half track in the middle was gone the next day. Now, whether they stayed in it and drove, we never shot it. We just forgot about it, I guess. Whether it was, they drove off or whether our ordinance people took it, I'll never know. Another incident that made an impression on me, we made an attack once across an open field, and we knew there was somebody over there on the other side, but we didn't know how much. So we attacked at daylight in the fog. It looked like a movie version. There was about 100 of us, and we got in within 50, 100 feet, and they started waving white flags after shooting at us and hurting somebody, and we were shooting back. We quit shooting, and we took about a dozen prisoners, old men. They must have been in their 60s, maybe even their 70s. They looked ancient to me at the time. Well, I had a young fella from Brooklyn who spoke Yiddish, who was my interpreter, and he could talk a little German. So I asked him why they shot at us, and he did, and they answered. I said, what did they say? He said, the SS made us shoot at you. I said, where's the SS? They left yesterday. And I thought that was an absolute classic example of German stupidity in accepting authority. Here they were virtually committing suicide against a suicidal order when the war was practically over, for no reason except they were taught they must obey authority. And it increased my contempt and dislike of the Germans. Another incident, the one that stands out as much as any, we had been oriented, that's my time, okay. We'd been oriented about them giving us a platoon of black soldiers. There were very few black combat soldiers. They had one air unit that was heroic, and they had been unsuccessful in one division where it was everything about it was wrong, and so they disbanded it. And but the war, they needed infantry replacements. And they had all these service people back in England and France that they didn't need any longer, like the anti-aircraft troops and transport troops and all that. So they asked for volunteers, and we had a platoon of black soldiers, and we had a lot of orientation about how you got to accept them and be nice to them, And at that point, all we wanted was more bodies to help us. They came up, and I censored their mail, which was the normal thing for officers to do. I censored some of their mail. They were better educated, generally speaking, than most of the boys in the infantry. And they were, I'll put it this way, they were overly aggressive. They were all volunteers, and they were undertrained. And we got in combat with them, and their casualties were horrendous. I think within 3 weeks, they had 50% casualties, which was very high even for this situation. That's some lousy luck. Once in an attack, we went to town, and we had a curved street through the town, and I was on the inside the curve, on the other side of the curve, and the German tank backing up every time we moved. Could take a pot shot at them every time they moved from house to house, but he couldn't shoot at us because, we were on the other side of the curve. But anyway, we took a German position, and we were using German foxholes and German trenches and so forth, and we wanted a pretty heavy mortar fire, S-88 fire, I'm not sure, but. And one of these boys right next to me got hit with a very small fragment in the temple. And the blood was pumping out of him. Every time his heart beat, it would squirt out like a syringe, when you pump a syringe. I put a compress on him and hollered for a medic, and the medic crawled down the hill in the trench because the fire was pretty heavy. In fact, my pack got hit, my radio got hit outside my foxhole, and he bandaged him better and had to stretch it. We rolled this guy over on the stretcher, and he put the head of him on his chest and shoulders, and the feet of him on my shoulders, and we crawled about 60, 70 yards till he could get on the other side of the hill and get under cover, and then he took over, and I went back to the unit, and I never knew what happened to this guy one way or another. I didn't know him. I don't know if he lived or died. It looked like to me he would probably survive, but I don't know. Anyhow, a couple of things you realize in combat after a while. It didn't take long. One, you became a fatalist, and you thought, well, I'll probably get hurt, and how bad is it going to be? You talked about $1 million wound, and that's what I got. But anyway, and the other was, you want to live, you better get in a hole and get below ground level, because that's relatively safe. So the first thing you did after an attack, or when you got in a position, or you got in a position on line at all, is dig a hole and get down below ground level. Well, we moved south after they closed the Ruhr Pocket. They reassigned us to the 3rd Army over the old Blood and Guts Patton, and we were supposed to attack up into the Harz Mountains. And we were in Harzburg, Germany, the last town before the mountains took off, and we were in the last house, and we were preparing to attack, and in fact, it was a black unit that came up, and they were bunched up, and I went out to get them in line and ready, and on the hill up in front of us was supposed to have been cleared by another company before, but apparently they missed somebody or they hadn't done it. And somebody opened up there with a submachine gun, and I got hit in the leg, which was strictly $1 million wound. It looked pretty bloody at the time. I put a tourniquet on it, and another kid got killed by the same burst of fire. But they dragged me in the house, and the medic put another tourniquet, and they took me out the back of the house and put me on the Jeep, and in a few minutes I was at Battalion 8 station, and there they patched me up a little better, and they asked me if I wanted morphine, but I had heard about all the dope fiends and everything, so I told them no, it didn't hurt much. Put me in an ambulance, it hurt like hell. Drove for about 3 hours back to a hospital, and there they took the bullet out, gave me morphine. Morphine, incidentally, is great. I highly recommend it.
Not for me.
Really? And they took the bullet out, and then a day or two later, they put me on a plane and flew me back to Reims, France, in a hospital there. And I stayed there from, well, this was April the 12th. I learned one thing: there's no such thing as an indispensable man, because Lieutenant Yudelson got shot and President Roosevelt died the same day, and we went to war anyhow. He had a good vice president, I had a good sergeant, so we were still able to win the war. Anyhow, I stayed there till May 8th was D-Day, and I remember some of the French guards started firing machine guns in celebration of VE Day, and we all went under the bed. We thought we were being attacked. So a couple of weeks later, I was patched up enough for them to close down the hospital, and they shipped me to the unit which was now in the Sudeten German part of Czechoslovakia. And we were in occupation, and it was Czechoslovakia, but it was strictly German. And you're not supposed to fraternize, you know, not even talk to the people, which was a lot of baloney, because that was impossible. And since my unit had filled up with replacements, incidentally, I was the 5th officer assigned to this company on the 1st of March, and we had got 2 additional replacements. And of the 7 of us, 1 finished the war with the company. Two were killed, and 2 hurt, and 1 got malaria, even another one broke a leg or something. So there was 1 survivor of the 7 of us in the company, not that we were all killed. But that was par for the course, pretty much, where you were in continuous combat, continuous face-to-face with the enemy. The casualties, particularly among platoon leaders.
Weren't casualties the highest among the 1st and 2nd lieutenants?
What's that?
Weren't the casualties the highest among the 1st and 2nd lieutenants?
Among rifle platoon leaders, yes.
Oh.
This company I was in, I saw figures, I think, had 256 casualties during the war, combat casualties. Cannon Company, which was never over a couple of miles away in the same regiment, I think they had 25 or 26 casualties during the war. So if you're on the forward part of the hill and you're in the attack, the casualties were very heavy, not necessarily at one time, but there was an attrition. And if you weren't there, then it was a totally different hostile environment. You were relatively safe unless it was a counterattack, a heavy artillery. You just didn't get shot at. Well, where was I? I said I was the newest guy. So the captain asked me if I wanted to do staff work, and I wanted to get out of Germany. I said, hell yeah. I didn't know what he was talking about. So they put me on a plane and shipped me to Reims, France, and I reported to what they call the Little Red Schoolhouse, which was Eisenhower's headquarters during the Battle of France. In Germany, it was probably the largest, it was a vocational school and one of the largest buildings in France, the Little Red Schoolhouse. You thought he was at Valley's Forge. Anyhow, I go to personnel and they ask me what I want to do. I said, well, I'd like to be a special service officer. That sounded good, you know, you meet the movie stars and all that. They sent me to a bird colonel who was a lot smarter and knew more. He looks at my record, he says, I see you had a year and a half at the Wharton School. Yes, sir. Good, we need Army exchange officers. I don't know how he figured I knew anything about it. I knew nothing about it, absolutely nothing about it. So they give you a little book and a report to Camp Washington up near Soissons, north of Reims. And our report, the camp is just being set up. They set up 5 or 6 camps to redeploy the units that were going home, going to the Pacific. So they needed a total staffing. They had an infantry battalion to do the housekeeping at each one of them. So I report to old Colonel McLaughlin in a tent. He's got a stick in the ground with a piece of typing paper stuck at camp headquarters. That's how ready they were. Our report is an exchange officer. He says, well, I suppose you know your job. Yes, sir. He says, well, these people hadn't had any supplies for 5 or 6 weeks, so get them here quick as you can. Yes, sir. So I go out, and the engineers are supposed to have built me a bunch of PXs, and they laugh at me. They say, Lieutenant, we got 7,000 people coming in here in 3 days, and we don't have latrines or beds for them yet. So what I do? Well, we had a German PW camp there with a couple of hundred German soldiers in it, very benign. And there was a German engineer camp they had in France that was under control of the engineers. They said, you go get whatever you want. So I told, they gave me 5 good sergeants. They had some real experience in retailing, running supermarkets and so forth. And I told them, get your Jeep and a trailer, and you go to every unit you can find. They'll give you all the tools they can spare, and they will not get them back. He comes back with a whole bunch of tools. So we went to we got a truck and we went and got a bunch of lumber, and we borrowed the German PWs who were anxious to work. They weren't required to. And we built shelves and counters, and they gave us tents, big tents. And in a week, we had some PXs in operation. So I ran that darn thing. They sent me somebody over me for a few weeks, but everybody was going home. And one interesting incident, I had a warehouse, an old barn, because I had 5 PXs now, and we could never get enough trucks to move stuff around, so a friend of mine, the captain in the motor pool, says, you see on a truck? Hell yeah. So he says, don't take it off the post. It was stolen and turned over to us for safekeeping. So I had all the transportation I needed then, except when the camp closed down one day, he was gone. I got nobody to give the darn truck to, and I'm worried they're gonna catch me with a stolen truck and I won't have to pay for it or something. I told the sergeant, get a Jeep. We drove into Reims about 30 miles away, and he took the truck into MP parking lot. They had to guard everything, or they'd get stolen. As far as I know, the truck is still there. No, I got rid of the truck, but you do a lot of improvising in the Army. Anyway.
Where were you when the atomic bomb was dropped? Because it was right around that time, wasn't it?
August, let's see. I was at this camp. Which, you know, we were very happy about the war ending. Now, I was already out of the hospital, I think. But anyway, we were very happy about it because we were slated to go to Japan for sure, be in the assault. I mean, that's what we were there for. But I got a break, and the guy assigned me to quartermaster headquarters in Paris. Instead of shipping me back to Germany, like a lot of them had to go back to occupation because we were closing down. So I go to the headquarters. This was the headquarters for everything outside of Germany, called Delta Base Headquarters. And the colonel assigned me the job of keeping charts. He loved charts, and I kept the charts on. The charts were the amount of tonnage of every kind of material in all the various depots. Well, there were a couple of incidents there that I thought were very interesting at the time, okay?
I think it's like, you still got about 15 minutes, 20 minutes.
All right, I'll be through, bud. Once, trivia, I'm sitting at my office one morning, and I see the captain across from me jump to attention, everybody else, and I've got my back to the door, and I'm reading the Paris Herald Tribune, and I look up, and there's our Colonel, General Lucius Clay, and his 4 stars. And the Colonel, Lieutenant, what you doing reading the paper this time of day? And the General says, "It's all right, Colonel. There's an article about the quartermaster in it today." And that was the end of that incident. But you don't generally run into 4-star generals when you're a lieutenant. But the Colonel assigned me a job of liaison. The problem, we get a TW, a telegram through channels. The Colonel came Saturday afternoon, and I shouldn't have been in the office, and the sergeant shouldn't have been there. And the Colonel comes in, they just got a request through channels. Senator Meade of the Surplus Property Committee of the United States Senate went to see what we could do with all the property we had accumulated in Europe. So I asked a simple question: what is the value of all the property under your command? So as an hour, I asked all of his staff people, and the Colonel gives me the job of coming up with a number, and this is everything outside of Germany: France, England, North Africa, Italy. Yes, sir. So he walks out, the sergeant's a good tiger, so we look at each other. I got these charts that tell me we got so many jillion tons of equipage. Equipage is anything from tent pegs to helmets to stuff you wear and wear out, use up, tents. We don't know what the hell it is. The class 1 food, we got a pretty good, I figured, all right, food is food. Then the other classification is fuel, and that was solid and liquid. We don't know what that is. So we start making up numbers. Food, it cost, I remember the number, 55 cents a day to feed a man. That's about 5 pounds, so that was easy, you know. Then you come to the equipage. Well, what's it worth? Well, I remember cotton, I think, was 8 or 10 cents a pound or something, and I figure that's 50% of the value of all this junk. So everything's worth 20 cents a pound, so we write down numbers, and every depot's got so many tons of this, and he extends it out, and we got pages of columns, you know. The same thing with fuel. My mama used to pay $8 a ton or something for coal when we had a coal thing, so everything's worth $10 a ton. Gasoline, about the ton. Gasoline, fuel, or maybe it's wood burning stuff. We don't know. We make up numbers, we put it there. We get through, we got a number at the bottom of the page of $4,600,000,000 and something million. Maybe it was $6,400,000,000 and something million. A week later, on the Paris Herald Tribune, Senator Meade holds a press conference, and there's my number, the number of 1 infantry lieutenant, and that's what Congress is going to make appropriations on. So anyhow, they got the same kind of number, I'm sure, from Ordnance and Signal and all the other services, you know. Who the heck can get it? But the girl, is it correct? Yes, sir. You know, he couldn't tell me it wasn't correct. Anyway, he assigned me, in addition, to be a liaison to bring back information from a committee or something they had formed to decide what to do with this darn stuff. And they wanted to move it. The Italians and the French and the English couldn't buy it. Half of it didn't want. It was worthless, and they wouldn't borrow enough money from us to pay for it. So they had no money. So we're going to move everything into Germany. And it came up, transportation came up. If they'd given us, the French had given us an entire transportation system, barge and rail, and use the highways. It'd take us 2 years to move all this stuff into Germany. Well, we did move it down to the parks and things, and we began using it up. But there was another problem with Ordnance. I remember Ordnance Depot 804. The depot was nothing but piles of ordnance, the size of each one the size of a room, an ordinary room, of various kinds of ammunition, machine gun ammunition, rifle ammunition, hand grenades, various kinds of artillery ammunition, and it was parked on the main highway between Belgium and Paris, and they both, the Belgians, of course, and the French want to get rid of it. They want to, you know, so some guy has a bright idea. We'll use these German PW experts and let them dismantle it, and we'll use the metal, and we'll salvage the nitrate for fertilizer. Well, they blew up a few of these guys, and they gave that up. That would have taken 10,000 years. Some guy had a better idea. We got all these surplus trucks and all these surplus landing craft, and we put the ammunition and we put all this junk on the trucks and drive them up on the landing craft, and we take it up in the North Sea and sink it, and then we're through with it. And that's what they finally did with a lot of this stuff, after moving a lot of it into Germany. But ammunition doesn't keep forever either. It gets old, And I learned that when I got called back in the Korean thing, that it can be very dangerous keeping it. But anyway, so one more incident, I think I'll be about through.
How did the war change your life?
Well, we get to that, all right. I told you there was, I don't think the combat was intensive enough or long enough to make any great psychological effect. I mean, one of the reasons I think is I never bonded with these people. Where the units, and you see all the movies where they were together 2 or 3 years, and every time somebody got killed or something, it was a great tragedy. And that was true on the ships, particularly in the units where, like I say, where they've been. But I got there. By the time I got there, I didn't know anybody. Nobody knew me. There was a big turnover of people. I got there, I think I had a platoon of 36 men. And we got, if I remember correctly, 7 replacements, including a couple of sergeants. And when I got hurt, I think I had 22. That means I had 20 casualties in 6 weeks. And these guys, we didn't get to know them. I don't think it was 3 people whose names I remember from the whole thing. And so I wasn't emotionally involved with them. So I'll say again, I don't think the combat itself had too much effect on me. But I think there was a couple of things. One is you're thrown into this kind of responsibility at a very young age after being very sheltered all your life. And you grew up rather quickly, and it made you realize that you could make decisions and do things that you didn't realize you were going to have to do many times until you were 30 or 40 years old. The other was, I think, being a Southerner and not having had any contact to speak of, any black people, I think it made a big impression on me, the fighting with these guys, and realizing that they were the same, and that what terrible indignities our normal situation here in the South had impacted on them. And I think that were the 2 things that really affected me, left any long-term effect on me in the military.
And the GI Bill.
Well, the GI Bill, I was in college. Oh, the GI Bill, well, I wasn't personally affected that much, although they did pay for the balance of my education. I had another, because of the training in the Army, ASTP, I only needed 4 semesters to graduate. I had 3, well, I really needed 3, so I graduated a full year, and they paid all of my tuition. You could draw a head on it. So I drew it because Penn was fairly expensive. At that time, I think it was $2,000 a year tuition. That was an expensive school at the time. So the GI Bill was a factor, but I never thought of it as being important in my life.
Because you would have gone anyway.
Yeah, I was going to go. After coming home and not deciding what I'd do and working in a lousy way in my father's business for 6 months, I decided to go back to school, and I did, and I met my wife there. So that was the good thing about the war. It delayed me until she got ready. And she sat next to me in a class. So that's the good results of the war. I'll say about my infantry training, you asked about it. I thought for many years I'd really done a great job, but in retrospect there were a couple of problems. One, the fact that I had not bonded with these people. I didn't know how to work and get the support that I was entitled to. Not they denied me when we were in a situation where I should have asked for artillery support or some sort of reinforcements or more instructions or more special something. I didn't know to do it, and looking back, the people under me were reluctant to take charge. I was surprised at how willing everybody was to defer to authority. I was 21 years old. Some of the sergeants were older, maybe pushing 30 or something. But they accepted without question that you were in charge. I didn't have hardly any problem with that. The other thing is the use of weaponry and so forth and the tactics. I got better as I went along, but it didn't last long. And that was almost always true of the bottom commission ranks in the service. And the Germans didn't have this, the slogan of OCS was "Follow me," and I'm not sure it still is. The Marines, everybody's macho and gung ho. The German officers did not do that. They sent the men ahead, but we were supposed to lead by example, and the example was to get yourself shot. So, like you say, the casualties among infantry officers was probably the heaviest in the war.
Do you ever feel like responsibility or
What's
guilt?
that?
Did you ever feel like responsibility or guilt for anybody who died under you?
Only vaguely, yes. But like I said, I didn't get emotionally involved with them. I didn't know them. And in that respect, that was a help. But I'm sure that if I had been more experienced and a little more knowledgeable, we had casualties heavier than we should have had. But I'm sure that was true of the entire organization. I say, when we crossed the Rhine River and the war was virtually over, this is in late March, and they were crumbling and they were surrendering by the tens of thousands. But they kept shooting. Hitler apparently had given every high school kid in Germany a submachine gun, and just like the kamikazes, go out and get yourself killed. And that's what happened, is we get ambushed in various places, and we'd either kill them or they'd run out of ammunition. And but meanwhile, we got hurt. And so the casualties were very heavy. I think we must have lost over a third of our front combat units. When I say front combat, I'm talking about the people that are in the foxholes, you know, in those last few weeks of the war. In fact, this book I mentioned before, called Roll Me Over, he says the worst day he had in the war was April the 13th. That was the day after I got hurt. He says his platoon had 7 casualties, and he also heard that Roosevelt died that day. I thought I was the last guy in the war to get shot, but apparently, and one of the few people that I really liked and got close to, or fairly close to, was a captain, a young captain we had, who was a Dartmouth graduate, and he got killed in one of those ambushes, shooting at him from the roadside. So, I didn't ever have to feel much guilt from all of that. Want to see my Purple Heart?
Yeah, sure.